Well, welcome to A Dad Talks to Dads. This is the fourth podcast where we discuss the challenges of parenting and meeting those challenges biblically as best as we can, and trusting that God would provide us with the wisdom, the understanding, the knowledge, the grace, and everything that He can give us and will give us willingly to parent our children, and training them up in the way they should go. So again, we are uh, using a book by J.C. Ryle, Duties of Parents, which you can get free at Kindle. I'll just post that up here. And so there, if you want to get it for free, you can. You can go to Amazon and download the Kindle app, put it on your phone and on your tablet or on your laptop or computer. Last week, we talked about the principle of that a child is dependent upon you. And what we were trying to convey in that point was that there really shouldn't be anybody else other than the parents of the children, that the children should be depending upon. In other words, you're not delegating that to your grandparents or your parents, to the church, to the Sunday school teachers, to the pastor, as well-meaning and as much of a integral part that they can and will play in the raising up of your children. But the point was that, in emphasizing that we shouldn't be delegating the our responsibilities to to anybody else. That if the child is to know anything, that you are where the buck stops, so to speak. You are the start and the end of their raising and their maturity and their growing and in their development. And as far as they should be concerned, you are the contact of their lives from this point until they reach maturity and leave the nest, so to speak. Anyway, so hopefully we cover that in podcast 3. Excuse me, I got a little tickle in my throat. So, but bear with me. Hopefully, we'll get through this. So anyway, so we come to almost a similar um, part principle, and the fourth principle is this: train them, knowing that the soul of your child is most important. Now, it kind of switches the relationship. So the child, in principle 3, is supposed to know they are depending upon you. Okay, that you haven't delegated to anybody else. No nanny, nobody else, not the pastor, nobody else. It's you that they're depending upon for their well-being and their growing up. Now, this principle, J.C. Ryle is trying to convey, to train them in knowing that the soul of your child is most important. Now, I'm going to speak probably for most parents out there who are watching this or have taken any interest in biblically raising up their children. You probably recognize this, um, and I don't think there's any loving parent out there, or any parent that really just doesn't understand this kind of principle. It should be self-evident. Training them, knowing that their soul is what you are after, or not so much that you're after, but the soul is what you're caring for. There's a person, there's a physical being, okay, your son or your daughter, and in that being that you're presented with, that you see, there's a soul, there's a spiritual being, there's a image bearing person, okay, in your child, and that child has personalities made up of emotions and mental thoughts. At the young age, obviously, from infant to toddler, doesn't seem like much, but they are. They're growing. They're observing. I've seen a lot of studies done of how much information children are taking in, even at infant stage to toddler. It's just incredible. Um, but from the very beginning, we as parents should recognize this principle. And I'm pretty sure I'm speaking to the choir, and we don't have to pretty much dive too much into this. And this one is going to be a little bit different than in my previous presentations, because I'm going to take a quote from another book I've read in studying the book of Proverbs, and in this book, it's a book by Daniel J. Estes, and the book is called "Hear My Son." And here's what he says. He says, "The learner, your child, must not only know what wisdom teaches and do what wisdom commands, but he must also love what wisdom values, so that his or her life is shaped in accordance with Yahweh's desires." Now, why I chose this quote, I think it really helps convey the importance, or give us direction in our minds as far as what it means to know that we are training up with knowing that their soul is valuable, or their soul is what's in play here. Because a lot of times parenting can turn into um, just do what I tell you, obey me, and everybody's going to be happy, right? Parents, we, as you know, when who have older children now, we know the more they obey, the more they cooperate, the happier we are. But if you remember in one of my previous podcasts, I said, it's not about how much they obey and how much they disobey. Although that has some bearing, that is a gauge, okay, of where they're at in their hearts with God and with you. However, what we're after is not them understanding that they are affecting us when they disobey or when they sin against us, but that they're sinning against God. But most of all, that this sin is coming from their souls. This sin is coming from themselves, and it's a reflection upon their relationship with God and how they value or see God or don't see God in some terms. So this helps us kind of really focus in on the soul aspect of our children, and that we're the ones that need to know this and keep this in mind, because it gets hard, because you can get in habits and patterns and ruts of and just think that if my Johnny or my Susie is behaving, then everything is okay. Like, we shouldn't get into um, a false sense of security and confidence in a behavior chart, even though, again, that's a good gauge. But we need to see how they're responding in other things and aspects, and looking at their soul, and diving deeper, so to speak, with how they're acting and how they're they're talking and communicating um, on a regular basis, and not just obeying just to appease mom and dad, and not to get in trouble, but to try to get an understanding. If my child is understanding that their life's decisions are are reflective, or going to be reflective, of how they value the wisdom and the commands of God. And so we'll kind of get a little bit into that a little bit more. But let me go into a couple of scriptures here. The first one is out of Proverbs 7:1-5, and it says, "My son, keep my words and treasure my commandments within you. Keep my commandments and live, and my teaching as the apple of your eye. Bind them on your fingers, write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call understanding your intimate friend. That they may keep you from an adulteress, from the foreigner who flatters with her words." I don't want to reflect too much on the words here, on what it's saying. I want to really reflect on what it's implying, what the implicit nature of what the author is how they're communicating this. If you notice, it's a pleading and with the child, not so much a pleading, but more of a a relational communication, and a gentle and but affirming way of expressing to the child, I am taking my cues from God. I want you to listen to me because they're going to help you. In verse 2, keep my commandments and live. It's not so much in keeping the commandments, it's the living part. It's how we're going to be responding to the good and the bad, the difficult and the suffering in life. And that's going to be play a very, very important part as they grow older in the years that they're growing up in. Notice also it says, write them on the tablet of your heart. See, this is again uh, a reflection of we're trying to convey that commandments are not just arbitrary or just static uh, ways of obedience. You know, there's a connection to it, and that connection is with God, and that should be a reflection of our heart. In other words, we obey we obey God because we love God, and so that's important that we don't put um, uh, are leaning towards that obedience is if I just obey God, then He'll love me. No, that's not how it works. It means that God, the reflection of my heart, is why I obey. Okay, not to get God's favor, but because I have God's favor, I love Him and will do what's right by Him. And lastly, in verse 4, say to wisdom, you are my sister. And I think this is really key. And call understanding your intimate friend. Um, Again, what we're after is for the children to finally take on understanding and knowledge for themselves and apply it well in their lives uh, according to God's desires and will. But notice how it's saying, you are my sister. In other words, call it your sister. In other words, a sibling, a family member, a relation. And again, it's that relationship that we're after. And that's part, again, focusing in on understanding that our training is about the soul of the child. Okay. That again, we're not trying to stuff them with commandments. We're not trying to stuff them with behaviors or morality. We're trying to help them understand and form in them an understanding, an acknowledgement, an observation, and of who God is and His world, and to try to help them make that connection with Him. The sooner in their lives, the better. The next scripture I want to look at is trust in the Lord with all your heart, uh, and do not lean on your understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Most of us are probably very familiar with it. It's probably one of our memory scriptures. And you know why I picked this verse was that again our child needs to see that you're trusting in the Lord as much as you're asking them. Okay, um, I think sometimes there's a certain disconnect or a gap. The child doesn't see. It's like, well, it's easy for you because you're an adult. You could tell me these things, and sometimes I can feel that way when somebody else tells us to do something. It's like, wow, you already know how to do this. You've mastered this, and then we kind of try to we sometimes pressure our kids, or we impose it on our kids sometimes unfairly and unduly, and we need to watch out for that. But if our children are seeing that we're valuing their soul, um, and how we're valuing their soul is because we value our soul, and we realize that our soul is communicating with God and is um, uh, responsible for its actions. And um, I have a lost train of thought, but they're seeing that we're conveying and understanding that we have a relationship with God, that we're taking the commandments seriously in our lives as well as we're asking our children to, and that's kind of where we're headed with this. So I really have 2 points with this, and hopefully they're prevalent to what what we're talking about here in regards to how is it that um, I should be doing this, and because I do value my child's being, their person. I do value more of who they are than what they do and what they don't do. I value who God has created and has made them, and what they will be. It's yet to be determined. But you are responsible for their development and their growth, again, towards the Lord and having a heart towards Him. And so I only have two um, things I want to bring to attention that I think will help us um, look at how to value our children in their soul. Because one of the things that I know is that I hear a lot of parents talk about time. That is a major factor. I understand that. A lot of times our time is taken up by other things, and sometimes we don't have the time for the children like we'd like to. So I just want to give a little bit of encouragement in that, and I just want to look at this point here. So let me pull this up. And here's my point. If you look at Proverbs chapter 30, verse 7 and 8, two things I ask of you, deny them not to me before I die. Remove far from me falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me. And so why I choose this verse in talking about time. I don't think there's any parent out there who doesn't understand your child needs some time. I don't think there's any parent. I don't want to talk about prioritizing time. I think parents understand that, hey, we need to prioritize. Okay, that I can't spend my time with doing certain things or with certain people more than with my child at times. And so one of the things I want to convey, and this comes from my experience because this is a verse that kept me in check in regards to time, because time can get away from you really quickly. It could go by real fast. We all understand that. I think what happens sometimes is we allow things to creep into our lives that um, mitigate or not mitigate, but maybe replace the time that we should be spending on our children. And one of the advices I gave to a friend of mine who we were talking about this, I says, one of the things you have to guard against is making sure that you are managing what God has given to you in your sphere of domain, yes, your sphere of influence or your domain. In other words, I'm a dad. I have a wife. I have 5 children, and I have work, and I have a house. I have certain material and people and things in my life that I am responsible for and I've given to manage, that God has given to me, that I need these things to just to do the minimum things that is asked of me, caring for the family, caring for the house, and things of that nature. What sometimes happens is we start taking on other things in our lives that God has not asked us to do. And that's my simple point. Just be on guard and make sure the things that are in your life are things that God has asked you to manage, that God asks you to be responsible for your life. You know, be careful what you volunteer for. Be careful what you let in your life. Projects are not bad. Entertainment is not bad. Um, well, some entertainment is bad, but what I'm saying is, those things have their place. It's just a matter of how much are you taking on in your life that you weren't enough to manage. Because I see that more of a problem where parents have taken on something that they really should. It's just something they want to do for whatever reasons. That they just want to do it. Because they want to be helpful, and that's a great thing to do. But if it's something that God has not asked you to do, and you have not prayerfully considered and say, God, is this part of the development? Because I have children here, because that is your primary responsibility. Um, just be careful with that. Just filter what's in your life and making sure that you are managing what God has asked you to manage in your life, and that will help mitigate time being robbed from you and your children. Okay. Second thing is this: in Proverbs chapter 15, verse 29, the Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayer of the righteous. Now, um, I don't think there's no Christian parent out there that understands they need to pray. And I'm not talking about prayer at the dinner table. I'm not talking about prayer at church. I'm not talking about, just a mere devotional in your family, your personal time. I'm talking about, are you praying, um, for your children and understanding that their soul is what's your responsibility. That there's a person with emotions, again, of intellect, and a soul that requires our attention, and that does not come easy. It comes with time. But let me say this: a lot of times I think um, we tend to just look at the surface of things and just gauge things like that, and not see the inner underworkings of what's going on in the hearts of our children, and that's important. And prayer is a way, is a means that God provides for us to prepare us, to provide us the wisdom that we need to make those decisions. One of the things as parents is you're going to come into certain circumstances and situations that you're going to get caught off guard, and it's like, well, what do I do? And if you only had been praying, um, you could have been better prepared. And so, if you have young children now's a good time to get into habit of praying for your child, uh, and uh, and seeing, and asking God to make sure that He is giving you the eyes to see their heart, to see their motivations and their intentions, and to see the things that need to be worked on. Which brings me to our question for this podcast, and that is this: are you taking time to pray how you should be training your children? Um, we all want more time, and then we feel exasperated when we don't have enough time. And that's again with the Proverbs, don't give me more than I need, and don't give me less than to cause me to sin. But God, give me what I need, and manage that well. Be good stewards of that. But the only way to do that is to trust in the Lord, and to trust in the Lord means to pray. And prayer is an indicator of how much you trust God. Um, uh, you know, because a lot of times we think we've walked with God for so long that we think we've got it all together and we know it all, and nothing could be farther from the truth. Your children are being probably exposed to things as they grow older. New challenges present themselves. You need to be in constant prayer. You need to be praying for the soul of your children. And let me say this: it doesn't stop when they're, and it shouldn't stop when they're um, grown and out of the house. I have a friend, um, a Christian brother who has children that have left the house, and every time I see him at Sunday, I know that he's been praying for his children. Um, Now, his children do not know the Lord like he knows the Lord. They know of him, but not in that personal way of relationship through Jesus Christ. And that is something that he desires for them, and I know that he's praying. So if you're in that situation, don't stop praying. Don't stop managing your time and your domain. They're still in your sphere of influence. They're still there for you. You never stop being a parent to them. You never stop being their father. You never stop being their mother. And that's what I tell my children. I says, I will always be your father. There's nothing going to change that dynamic of that relationship. And so, are you taking time to pray for how to train your children? And that's key. So hopefully that's this has been helpful to you. Again, if you have any questions or desire to give any feedback, go ahead and email me at fbcadrianmn@gmail.com. Dad talks to dad. Until then, God bless and thanks for listening.